sitting weird.
You're good.
Okay.
Fine.
Cool. I'm gonna put this over here. Trying to get adjusted. Can we move this in the middle, like before?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. That worked the best. And you can... Oh, that works. That's great. Yeah, perfect. Because then I can... This is them, right? Like, what do you do with that?
See.
All right.
Yeah, this should be good.
Okay, cool. I'm going to ask them all if they're here to say that they're here. Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, I want to test to see how long the lag is. So if you guys are joining us, if you can type in the chat box that you're here, that would be super helpful so I can see how quickly it responds. I see, yay, Sequoia. I see yours. And Rebecca. And Cassie. And Emily. Okay, cool. And it looks like it says there's 4 so far, so that works out. Okay, awesome. I did try this with the juniors the other day, and it was seamless. It worked great. Email the link. No, it is on Schoology. The link for the Q&A questions is on Schoology. It's in the update section, and it is also posted as an assignment so that it would not be missed. So it's in both places. Yes, that is correct. The Ruth Q&A. That is what this is. So it seems like the back and forth is working out pretty well, so I can answer your questions in real time. But this is this video is for the questions that you girls asked on your first assignment. So the questions at the very end of the assignment, I asked you to ask 2 questions about the chapter, things you thought were confusing or interesting, that didn't make sense about a specific verse or just in general. So I've taken those questions as expected. Many of them were similar, and so we're going to go over them to answer the questions. This is essentially like taking notes in your journals that we normally would, but instead of having to write down the questions, they are there for you in that Google document I sent to you. You are just going to be taking notes. So whether you're watching live or whether you're watching afterwards, you will then be taking notes and then uploading your note to that assignment on Schoology. If there are any questions, you can let me know in the comments or you can email me. So we are going to get started. I just have my questions here to the side, and I will be answering them. I will at times be reading things. If I read from a commentary, I will then be posting the commentary on the assignment. So, or actually might even, I think there's a way, I'm not great at YouTube, but I think there's a way to post it on the link to this video so that you can see which commentaries I am reading from. So the very first question, which honestly is a really, really good question, even noticing this, is why would a princess, so we heard or learned last time Ruth is known to be, it's not necessarily proven in history, but known to be the daughter of King Eglon from Moab. So in this case, she's technically a pagan princess. So why would she marry an Israelite? We know that the Israelites are living in Moab. They came from there because there was a famine in Bethlehem. And now she's getting married to one of these Jewish boys. So why would she do that? I did actually pull from a commentary here. Oh, coffee. Thank you. Can you put milk in it? There we go. Working from home. Why would she want to become Jewish, marry someone who's Jewish? Now, granted, even though she's a princess, she still is a woman, and so women wanted to have children, and you need to marry someone in order to produce children at the time. Students are telling you, good job. And so she still would want to have a husband. Really? Thomas, it's in the film. Are you doing that on purpose? Oh, you are doing that on purpose. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. So I am going to still, so that's the fact right there, is that she still would want to have a husband no matter what. However, there is actually a good commentary I found. I do believe it's a Jewish or Hebrew commentary, but that doesn't mean that it's not true. It's still something that we can obviously learn from, even though it's not from a necessarily Christian perspective. So I'm just going to read that. I think it's well written and it gives some perspective as to why it seems, from studying history, studying the person of Ruth, why Ruth would not only just marry someone because she wants to get married and wants to hopefully bear children, which obviously we know in her case did not happen, but why she would marry someone who is not from her original heritage or upbringing and even faith, if you can call it that. So, okay. How did it come about that the princess of one of the not so friendly neighbors of Israel became an example of Jewish womanhood? No, they do not need to be in full sentences. Definitely not. Well, for one thing, even long before Ruth had ever met any Jews, she had become disgusted with the idol worship of her own people, which was one of the lowest and most cruel. For among the gods whom the Moabites worshipped was Moloch, in whose honor young children were thrown into the fire. So there is a movie, I believe, that actually portrays this. I think I've seen the whole thing. I've definitely seen parts of it. It's pretty gnarly, but that is what they're portraying. The Moabites weren't actually technically forbidden to marry the Israelites. The Canaanites were in Deuteronomy, I believe. So it's not necessarily that, oh no, like these Jewish guys should not have married the woman. I don't believe this is explicitly forbidden, but it was just kind of weird because they obviously were worshiping very, very pagan gods, doing very strange and bad things. So it seems that Ruth was not really a fan of what was going on here. I'll keep reading. Ruth soon realized soon that no mercy or kindness or justice could be expected from such idol worship, and she searched for a new religion. So I don't know, I guess the sources where this commentary is getting that information, but it does seem that she was not content, just with where she was, at currently. Then one of the 10 worst families in all of mankind's history, hit the land of Israel. Or famines. Did I say families? One of 10 worst famines. Whoops. Elimelech, one of the notables of Judah, came to Moab where he hoped to find food and find an easier life. Ruth became acquainted with the Jewish family and with their religion. Princess Ruth was happy to marry one of the 2 sons of Elimelech, even though it meant that she had to give up the comforts and honor of a royal position to join the household of a Jewish refugee. And that does actually seem in line with what we know from history as far as what happened with Ruth. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but even in her language, I think we mentioned this in the last video, when she decides to stay with Naomi, directly has to do with who she calls Lord, who she calls God. And that's pretty much it. So that is a good indicator that, yeah, she really took to the Jewish faith and following the God of Israel. So that is number 1. All right, before we move on, any questions on number 1, you can do it in the chat. I think I've already answered. If the notes need to be in full sentences, then no, they do not. So I'm going to take a sip of my coffee and give you guys a couple seconds to ask any questions about number 1. But I think hopefully it was helpful. We can pause for a second. Yes. Let's see if there's anything I want to write down for that one. I will put the commentary I was reading from, as Rebecca says, to put the link in the description. That's the thing that YouTubers say, I think. She was happy because she didn't like the gods. Essentially, that's what this commentary is saying, that she was glad to kind of move away from that religion of the pagan religion and move into a religion of a God who was merciful, who didn't ask for child sacrifices into the fire all the time, which is one of the things that we've talked about, kind of like ridiculously disgusting and troubling and, like I said, gnarly forms of worship of pagan gods when we studied Habakkuk and Hosea, and this is just another one of those. It's not good. Hopefully that answers that question. So basically, because of her own morals. Again, that's there's no way to prove that. All we have is the text, and then all we have is extra biblical texts that give a little bit more background information. So some of what the commentary was sharing, or the commentary that I was sharing from, is from like Talmudic, like Israeli tradition. But there is some history with that as well. So I am going to give the link in the description. But essentially, if unless all you care about is power and money, it's really hard to continue to worship a pagan god that was of this caliber, that asked for child sacrifices and things of that nature. So she, some other commentaries I was reading say that Ruth was also just a kind person in general, and so from that, it would be difficult to stay in that type of situation. And now you're watching these people who are coming into your land worship this other god who is I don't know the Hebrew word. You could ask Mr. Weaver, but the word is loving kindness, compassion, mercy. This is the God that they serve, which is obviously so vastly different from the God of the Moabites. And so, yeah, that would be pretty appealing. And then wanting to be a part of that family, and then being invited to be a part of that family in marriage, that would be a good thing. So I think we're going to move on from that question. If you guys have any more questions, you can put it in the chat. Okay, number 2. Why did the sons die? So the sons referring to Mahlon and Chilion, Elimelech's sons. Someone wrote, there was no given reason, yet both the sons died at the same time. Well, we don't know if it was exactly the same time, around the same time. And only the sons. Actually, well, Elimelech died before them, actually. But yeah, not the daughters, that's correct. If it were just some sort of disease or famine, the odds would have been more likely to take at least one of the women. That is true. Very, very good inferring there. So, okay, there's a couple things here. This is kind of disputed among scholars, but some argue, okay, there's 2 things here. Some argue that Elimelech moving his family into Moab was not a good idea. That he was not trusting God. He didn't just weather out the famine. Yeah, there you go, Sequoia. Yeah, Elimelech died earlier. So that we know not everyone in Bethlehem moved away. There were people that stayed there, that stayed in Judah and just weathered out the famine during that time. Now, we do know that the famine was most likely a result of God disciplining the land from the disobedience. But it's not like, again, we've talked about when God punishes, when God says he's going to destroy, he does not mean destroy forever. We know that. He allowed his people to be taken into captivity, but they were not all slaughtered. We know these things. When God lets discipline happen, he still is faithful even in that discipline and is going to bring about good. So even though there's a famine, it's not like the Israelites were going to be wiped out. They have God's promises to cling to. But Elimelech decided to move his family to continue in their comforts. There's a question we'll answer later. Actually, it's number 3. So I'll just skip kind of back and forth between number 2 and number 3 right now because they kind of are related. So number 3, your question is asking about Elimelech and Naomi as well as their sons were Ephrathites. I think I'm saying that right. Ephrathites, yeah. What does that mean? What is an Ephrathite? So an Ephrathite is someone who is essentially from royal family, the descendants of Ephrath, who lived around the city of Bethlehem, which is where they lived, which we know. And they were a noble line, so they were most likely pretty well off. Now, if they had stayed in Bethlehem or stayed in Judah, that would not have fared well for them. If they moved with all of their belongings and all their riches, then they wouldn't really have to share it with anyone. They could just keep it, and they could stay and living not in luxury, but in luxury, all things considered, just with a lot more creature comforts, essentially. So Elimelech did move his family, and that is debated as whether that was a good move or not. It is a practical one to move your family when there's a famine, but it is not necessarily showing much trust in God. All we know is from the text, it doesn't say either way. It doesn't say like God was mad at them for doing this or and God wanted them to do this. But when you look at the surrounding elements, it definitely doesn't seem like one that was a move out of faith. It does seem one that was a move out of fear and a move out of just what made sense to them at the time. So that being said, going back to kind of number 2 is why did the sons die? So some people might say, oh, God was punishing them so they killed their sons. Well, maybe. It seems a little bit morbid. Obviously, we know that God does sometimes use death as a punishment, but that is not stated in the text. I am not inclined to believe that. On the The other view that I am more inclined to believe has to do with the names of the boys. So, let me make sure I read this correctly. Malon and Killian, their names mean sickly and wasting, respectively. So, if you're going to name your kid that, like when they're born, there's a high chance that there's actually something wrong with them. Maybe it was something in the line of men of Elimelech that made these boys not very strong or healthy or able to withstand difficulty, since they were in a new land that they weren't used to. There is a chance that they honestly, their bodies just weren't used to it. If they really did maybe have deformities or have health issues, yeah, I can repeat the names and I'll actually write them down. Then it would make sense that they actually would, and the girls wouldn't be affected. So hopefully that makes sense. That is kind of from what I've studied in history and the commentaries that I've been reading, that does seem to make the most sense. That it really was more of a matter of chance and actually their own like biological makeup that made it so that these boys actually were not able to withstand the new environment in Moab, but that they were probably really sick from birth since their names. And now I will write them down. Which kind of it's so interesting how people are named in the Bible, and it gives us so much insight into like their lives or who they are or what they are. So Malon means sickly in Hebrew, and Killian means wasting. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. So there you go. So that is number 2 and number 3. I'll take a second to pause to see if you guys have any more questions about that before we go on to number 4. I'll take this with my coffee. My coffee matches my sweater. All right. Oh, is number 3 just short? Yeah, it is. It says in my Bible, it says that Elimelech and Naomi, as well as their sons, were Ephrathites. What does it mean? Was an Ephrathite? Ephrathite was just like Skoy said, they're from noble lines. They were from the descendants of Ephrath, who I think is the son of Judah. Don't quote me. I'll have to look that up. But they lived in Bethlehem, and we already knew that. It means they had money, they were noble, they were wealthy. Where did the family travel to? They traveled from, actually, I'll write that down. In Judah. There's a city of Bethlehem. Bethlehem should be a familiar city to you. And they traveled about 60 miles east. That's not east, but it's east. I don't know if that arrow is east. It's probably not. I'm so bad with directions. To Moab. There you go. Hopefully that helps. I don't know east. Wait, that is east. I think that's east. If you're looking at a map, that's east. Okay, yay, great. All right, cool. I'm going to get made fun of for this later. We are going to move on to number 4. Okay. This person wrote in one version I read online. Oh, I like this question. Good eye on this person. One version I read online, it said that Orpah and Ruth were sisters that married 2 brothers, but now it's just saying that there are 2 women who married 2 brothers. So which one is it? So, in Jewish tradition, not in the text, just regular Jewish tradition, it's held that they both were daughters of King Eglon and they were sisters. I looked for way too long to see if there's any tradition that said that. I could not find any. If you guys find any, let me know. Again, this is stuff, I'm sure Mr. Weaver has a lot more information, but I'm doing my best to answer your questions. So in the text, Naomi refers to Orpah as Ruth's sister-in-law at least twice, like twice within the same conversation. She doesn't call her sister. Otherwise, she would just say, go back to your sister. It's often that sometimes, especially in close families, that they might call each other brother or sister, even if they are brother or sister-in-law. Like I know my sister-in-law, Christine, Thomas's sister, calls her sister-in-law, Bethany, just sister sometimes. but no one would ever call their actual sister. Like, I would not call my sister Samantha my sister-in-law. That makes no sense. So if Naomi is specifically referring to Ruth as Orpah's sister-in-law, that's what we gotta assume it means. It means what it says, and that's that they're sister-in-laws. They're not actual blood sisters. So hopefully that answers that question. It's more likely they're just Moabite women living in the same area. Okay, number 5. In verse 9, Naomi says, "May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." In this quote, is Naomi hoping that her 2 daughters-in-law will find new husbands soon? Yes. Yes, she is. She's saying, hey, I wish you well. God be with you kind of thing. I hope you find another husband. So the simple answer to that first part of the question is yes. When there's 2 backslashes like that within a question, it means that they are separate questions from 2 different students, but they were similar enough that they go together in the same question. So along those lines, someone asks, why did Naomi want her daughters to leave her, and why was she so desperate to have sons? So that's kind of 3 questions within the same topic, essentially. So yeah, Naomi is hoping that her daughters will go away from her and find husbands. She wanted them to leave primarily because it would just be a way wiser decision if they did that. If they wanted the highest chance of finding a husband, staying with Naomi was not going to be good for them if that's what their primary goal was. And as we talked about in the last video, for a woman, especially in that time, I mean, granted, we're talking like 50, 100 years ago, still kind of the same thing. Women, couldn't own property necessarily. They needed sons and daughters to take care of them. You couldn't have sons and daughters unless you get married. So she was saying, yeah, hey, you want the highest chance of a normal life? Don't stay with me. Go back, go find a husband. I have no idea what it's going to be like in Bethlehem, where she was returning to. They knew the famine was over, but they didn't really know much else. And so she was saying, don't come with me. Just go find a husband back in Moab. Because they were on the way. So this is like, I'm about to draw sticky figures. This is going to be bad. So they're actually, it's kind of the opposite. So they're here. They're on the way, these like 3 people. We don't know how far they are. And they're all talking. So they're all literally already going back to Bethlehem right now. And Naomi is saying, hey, go ahead and leave me because I just realized you coming with me makes literally no sense if you actually want to have a family someday. I'm old. I'm not going to have a husband. I can't bear kids, which is what she was saying. And so Orpah goes back. Ruth does not. And they continue back. So hopefully that visual helps of those really ugly stick people. Okay. So yeah. Naomi it says, why is she desperate to have sons? Naomi's actually not desperate to have sons. She was just making a point that she's unable to produce sons because she's so old and doesn't have a husband, and it would make no sense for them to stay with her if they actually want to get married again and have a fruitful life. If the girls did stay with her, which Ruth obviously we know did, they'd kind of be living in poverty for a long time unless, someone took a pity on them and gave them food. There was not really a way for them to provide for themselves. So it's essentially, like telling someone who's homeless that you're going to live with them instead of go find a husband and have a house. Okay, finally, why did she want them to leave her? Okay, so there's 2 things here. Yeah, Naomi is not dumb, and she realizes that if she loves these girls, she needs to tell them to go. It would be really, really selfish for her to say, no, stay with me, stay with me. She's not doing that. She's saying, go, get away. I'm not in a good state. I'm in a bad mood, and my life is bad. Get away from me. Go have a good life. So that's one reason. She really did love them. She really wanted them to have a good life. Kind of, there is, though, if you read the commentaries and you listen to the language that Naomi is using, there's an underlying other reason too. She can't really have a pity party if she has people with her to comfort her, right? So she's saying, get away from me, my life sucks, everything's terrible. You've probably seen people do this before. Now granted, if people want to grieve and be alone for a bit, that's totally understandable. But we all need people. We cannot just grieve alone. That's obviously not healthy, and that's not how God made us. And so, sometimes people want to have a pity party, and if someone's there and just sits with them and doesn't leave and says, hey, I'm not going to give you advice. I'm not going to tell you how to feel. I'm just not leaving. I will sit here and you can cry. You can vent. You can do whatever you need to, but I'm not going to leave. I want to show you love. It's a lot harder to have a pity party when you can't say no one cares about you because someone clearly does. It's a lot harder to say, like, God's abandoned me and, no one loves me and no one cares about me and I'm by myself, if you're literally not by yourself, if someone actually loves you and cares about you. And that is a picture of God's grace to us. So Naomi was really grieving. We know that. But as we see in the later texts, she also had a pretty negative and hopeless attitude, which if you are a follower of God, feelings are feelings, but we need to remember that they're just that. They're just feelings, and we have to cling to the promises of God. Naomi knows in the back of her head God has not abandoned her, but she's kind of letting her feelings take hold of her in a pretty unhealthy way at this point. If Ruth stays with her, that's a glaring sign of God's faithfulness to her, and she can't just continue to complain. But if she were to be able to successfully send both of the girls away, then she could stay complaining, and she could just say, oh, my life sucks, and no one loves me, and everything's terrible. So she was having a hard time dealing with that, but Ruth is able to give her a healthy perspective. Okay, that is number 6. We only have 3 more questions. Or I'm sorry, is that number... No, that was number 5. Number 6 is actually kind of similar, but I'll take a pause for a second to see if you guys have any questions about that. It says 7 watching, but I think one of them is my husband, to make sure nothing glitches out. So maybe there's 6 of you. We are doing good on time. Okay. I don't see anything in the chat, so we're going to keep moving. Number 6, in verse 13, Naomi says, because the Lord's hand is turned against me. Oh, Naomi wants them to leave so she can complain. That's it's a little more than that, but there's 2 reasons Naomi wants them to leave. One, because she loves them and realizes that them staying with her would not be good for her. It would be selfish if she asked them to stay. It really would be. And 2, yes, she is pushing them away like a person who is hurt would be pushing another person away so they can just kind of complain and have a pity party. Yes, that is the second reason. She wants him to leave so she can in her mind, be justified in saying, God has abandoned me, which is what she is already kind of saying, which is actually the next question we're going to ask. So there's 2 reasons. So you do need to have that in your notes. 1, she turned them away because she loves them. She wants them to have the highest chance of having a family someday. That is not with her. She didn't want to be selfish in asking them to stay with her. And then the second reason being, she turned them away so that she can continue to have this like bitter attitude on life. I mean, Mara means bitter. She asked people to call her bitter because she believes her life is so terrible and hopeless. And if she has no one by her side, then she can hold to that like bitterness and she can hold to that frustration, that complaining, and feel justified in doing so, even though we know that God is faithful to her. So yeah, hopefully that answers that question. Okay, adjusting. Number 6, in verse 13. Hello, Allie. Verse 13, Naomi says, because the Lord's hand has turned against me. That's her description for, why they should leave her, saying, oh, God clearly hates me. You guys should go, which is actually the number 2 answer of number 5, or the second part of number 5. Was there a particular reason that God had turned against her? Did she do something to cause it? So I put a couple different questions together in number 6. That first part, is there a reason that God had turned against her? Did she do something to cause it? Again, that's a really difficult question to answer. Maybe. I mean, it's the same thing for us. Like we talk about in class. Sometimes when like bad stuff happens in our life, God is trying to get our attention. If you know that you're running off and like doing a bunch of stupid stuff and then all of a sudden your life starts going really poorly, there's a high chance that God is trying to wake you up and tell you, hey, stop doing that. Like this is not going to go well for you. But as we know, we talked about Job in Counterfeit Gods. You could be completely faithfully obedient to God and doing exactly what he wants, and bad stuff will still happen. So there's we cannot say with confidence for sure either way in this case, but as I already mentioned, some scholars say it was not a good idea for Elimelech to bring his family into Moab. We don't know if that was Naomi's idea or Elimelech's idea. We don't know, and so there's no real reason to like infer. But yeah, fleeing into the land of Moab during the famine was probably not God's best for his family, but that doesn't correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation. You guys have probably heard that. Just because of that, that's not necessarily the reason that God, had the sons die. It most likely had to do with their health, given their names. So that's the first part of that question. The second part is, was Naomi stating that she no longer believed or trusted God? Or was she recognizing the good things of her life were being ripped away, yet there was still a purpose in God's purpose? I would say, again, based on the fact that she that she did keep going, she did go back to Bethlehem, she didn't wander off into the desert to go die. So clearly she still has some fight and will to live, and she, Ruth does go with her. Yeah, of course she's grieving, and she has a right to grieve. I don't want to be too hard on Naomi. I mean, her husband and their sons died. Like, what? Like, that's a lot. That's a lot to deal with all within a short amount of time. And so, yeah, we can give her some benefit of the doubt, saying that, yeah, she has a right to be sad. But some of the language used does show that she's struggling with trusting God, that she is struggling with remembering that he will be faithful to her, that his promises are things that she can cling to, since she seems to be very, very, again, bitter about the state of her life. So, yeah, was Naomi stating that she no longer believed or trusted God? Stating, I don't think so. I think in her heart she was struggling based on her language, but it never in the text does she say, therefore I'm turning my back on God. She doesn't say, what Job's friends said to him, curse God and die. She didn't say any of that. She went back to Bethlehem, which is a Jewish community. So I think she's struggling with trusting God based on her language, but she didn't declare that she's like abandoning the faith. But yeah, I do think she's recognizing good things of her life are being ripped away. And I think she's struggling to remember that there is a good purpose in God's plan and that he can take even death and make something beautiful of it, which, spoiler alert, happens in this book. So there you go. Okay. Number 7. Is Ruth clinging to... Okay, yeah, this is a good question. Is Ruth clinging to Naomi considered loyalty or just being afraid of letting go? Why does Ruth stay? So these are separate questions within the same idea. Why did Ruth wish to stay with Naomi, but the other sister left? Why did Orpah not fight to be with Naomi like Ruth did? Okay, so the first part, it is absolutely considered loyalty. Like, it made zero sense for Ruth to stay. So I want to make sure you guys have that. Yes, it was absolute loyalty to Naomi and to the God of Naomi, which is Yahweh, the God of Israel. That whole concept of being afraid of letting go, that's kind of a new concept. That was not really something that that was a common phrase then. Oh, I'm afraid of letting go. They were nomads. Like, they were moving all around all the time in ancient Near Eastern culture. Of course, people would always, struggle with loss, but it wasn't this like, this is my creature comforter, this is my pet, or this is my family member. Like, there was so much more death than that we could even fathom. It was rare that people grew up to past the age of like 7. It was often that children died young. And so, yeah, letting go was a part of life. It was not like it is now. And I struggle. I'm not saying this on you guys. I do the same thing. Like, I don't want to let go of this friendship, or I don't want to let go of this memory or experience. That whole concept of being afraid of letting go is not something that would be common in that time. It is absolutely her loyalty to to Naomi and to God that would cause her to stay. And so then on that note, why? Then why does she stay? I mentioned this a little bit in the last video. She was a converted Jewish girl. She had decided that the God of Israel was her own God. And she decided that it was worth following the woman who brought her into the Jewish faith and being loyal and faithful to her than to go back to Moab, where again, they're worshiping pagan gods. So she could either go back to that if she wanted to, be wealthy and have a family and do the normal life thing. Again, that's all for herself. She could go back to Moab, easy, family would probably be stoked to see her again. Or she could go to Bethlehem and follow Naomi into a Jewish community, into the God that she had decided to follow, and not go back to a pagan god with really terrible forms of worship, including killing children. So she decides to stay with Naomi. Again, please remember, that means that she may never be married again. She may never have children. She may die of starvation. She doesn't know, but she is not going to let Naomi go back by herself. And that's what we know. Why did Ruth wish to stay? Okay, we already answered that question. Why did Orpah not fight Naomi like Ruth did. She didn't fight Ruth because she knew, or she didn't fight Ruth or fight Naomi because she knew that Naomi was right. If she wanted the highest chance of finding a husband, she had to go back to Moab. So we're not going to be too hard on Orpah. It made sense. And she just wanted to go have a family. So she just did that. Yeah. So that is number 7. We have 2 more questions left. I will take a pause. See if there's any questions on that. I'm trying to see who's here. Emily, Rebecca, Sequoia, Cassie, Allie. And there's one more that maybe someone has not said yet. Because then I think the 7th person is Thomas. Okay. Moving on to number 8. Oh, sorry. Ruth wanted to stay with Naomi because of the God she worshipped. Yeah, that was definitely the part of it. Would Ruth be an outcast if she went back to her father? I don't see why. They lived in Moab. Like the Jewish people, at least this family, at least Elimelech's family lived in Moab. And unless they were, no, they couldn't have. Unless they were hiding that they were Jewish, that, then it wouldn't necessarily be bad. The Jews didn't seem to be persecuted in Moab. They just weren't like primarily there. They were in a foreign land. Moab was not a Jewish land. It was not a Jewish community. So I know Ruth would probably be welcomed with open arms if she went back to Moab, actually. Like, oh, you came back, They probably were confused why she was going to Bethlehem in the first place, and she had no husband. So yeah, she would not be an outcast. That would not make any sense. But she betrayed... Yeah, that's true. That's true. She betrayed the pagan gods. But at the same time, like, she was the daughter of King Eglon. At least that's how the... tradition goes. And so if you're a princess, you kind of have a little more leeway there. And again, this is just what the community did. This is something that she was watching. And probably as she's growing up, something she was forced to participate in as herself. But as she pulls away from that, then she's able to decide what she wants to do with her family. Just remember, even though the Moabite pagan gods were obviously gross and terrible, they were not like the Canaanites. The Canaanites were ruthless and brutal and would kill people, obviously, if they didn't follow their god and do what they did. The Moabites didn't necessarily seem to do that, just their forms of worship were pretty gruesome. But they didn't seem to be hostile or antagonistic to people in their land that didn't worship their gods. So hopefully that answers that question. Okay, number 8. In verse 20, Naomi says, "Don't call me Naomi." She told them, "Call me Mara, because the Almighty made my life very bitter." Where did the name Mara come from, and who is the Almighty? So, Mara is just a Hebrew name, which means bitter. As we've talked about before, the word Naomi, and actually I am going to fact check myself really quick. I believe I said this in the last video. Yes, I was right. Okay. That the name Naomi, well, where did my pen go? Means pleasant, like pleasantness, even like sweetness, something that's pleasant. So she's saying, yeah, nope, my life is not pleasant right now. My life is bitter. So don't call me by this name. Call me Mara. So that's why, and I dropped my Sharpie on the ground. So that's why she says that. Almighty just refers to God. When she says the Almighty, she means the Almighty God. She says, He has made my life very bitter. So, I mean, in one sense, maybe. But we also know just from studying philosophy and theology that there's things that happen in life that God doesn't just like necessarily cause, like, I'm going to make that bad thing happen. But the bad things happen because of our choices and then just the natural consequences. And then obviously we know that the earth itself is not perfect too. Like there are diseases and there are things that happen that aren't necessarily God's punishment. They're just part of life. Like whether you're atheist or not, like the rain still falls. So it is difficult to try to put motive to something that the text doesn't give motive to. So we don't really want to do that. So when she says the Almighty made my life very bitter, is there a chance that God did this and was actually disciplining her? Yeah. And is there a chance that her sons just died because they were sick and that's something that she has to learn to trust and cling to God with? Yeah. So all we know is that she right now is convinced that things aren't going well. It is far past the class time. Yeah, but we started at 11:15, and I said this video goes until 12. If you gotta go, you gotta go. There you go. Go until 12, exactly. Okay, so why all of a sudden does Naomi want to be called Mara? I believe we answered that question. And why does Naomi change her name? We know from the past that name changes mean a lot in scripture, but please take note, God did not change Naomi's name. Naomi changed Naomi's name. This is not something that that God had wanted for her. And as we'll see as we continue to read the book, this is something I want you to write down for number 8. The text doesn't refer to her as Mara. It keeps calling her Naomi. She's the one that wants to be called Mara. God does not call her Mara. That's something that she's putting upon herself, like a new identity. Like, now that this is happening in my life, I want to be recognized as this thing. But that isn't what God wants her to be recognized for. Her life will still bring about pleasantness at some point, and we'll see that as we continue to read the book. So, all right. Number 9, last one, in verse 21, Naomi says, I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. In what way had the Lord brought her back empty? Literally with no children or husband or spiritually. So again, this is Naomi's perspective. We have to read it exactly as it is in the Bible. I'm going to write this down. Prescriptive is not the same as descriptive. So descriptive obviously means describing something. And prescriptive, like a prescription, is like telling you, hey, do this, hey, take this. So it is like instruction, essentially. So just keep in mind that especially in the Old Testament and Old Testament narrative, like what we're studying right now, there's a lot of descriptions of things that aren't necessarily God declaring this to be, and this was a good idea, and this was a good thing. So as you're reading the Bible, if you are someone who's trying to do that, if you're reading the Old Testament, just keep this in mind. If you're not sure if it's something that God would condone or not, look it up. That's what commentaries are for. You can obviously always ask me or Mr. Weaver. We'll respond. Mr. Weaver's getting better at texting from this whole epidemic and being digital. So we'd love to answer those questions. There's also super great commentaries too. So just keep that in mind. When Naomi says this, I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty, that is her perspective. She's allowed to feel that way. She's allowed to express that, as I say in class, like express your feelings. But I would encourage you and myself to express those feelings to God directly. God, why are you doing this? God, it feels like you're not there. Things like that. So literally with no children or husband, yeah, she obviously is that. But, and this is where we'll end today. We have a couple minutes left. She is allowed to feel what she feels, but again, not get her feelings so in the front of her mind that she forgets who God is and forgets God's promises to her. She needs a healthy dose of reality. We all lose things. We all lose people. And that is really, really hard. And we're allowed to grieve those things. But losing people and losing things does not make us empty. Does not make Naomi empty. That is how she feels right now. But she is not empty. Her life is not empty. And God has not abandoned her. God will then, as we'll see, use Ruth in the life of Naomi to show her that, to remind her of this. Our fullness and our identity is not in our husband or our kids or circumstances, but it is in God. And we know that even when we feel empty, that's the times that we have the opportunity to cling to God even more and ask God, hey, please show me how you're going to use this. And God does use this in Naomi's life. It's just a little matter of time. So it is 11:59. Super on time. I'm very proud of myself. Thank you guys so much. There looks like there's like 6 of you. As Emily said, this is how it is for all the time. If ever you need to leave in the middle of a live stream or come later, totally fine. I'm thankful that you guys are even here at all. For Counterfeit Gods, we'll continue to use Zoom because it's more interactive, and maybe even for some other things, but these things I will use this. If there's any further questions, I will answer those. Obviously, you can still email me or text me or put it in the comments, any of that stuff. So that would be great. Make sure that you update your notes and then submit them to Schoology tomorrow by 11, like normal class. So see if there's any... Okay. All right. I guess that's it. Bye.